When you look up and see a living rock legend like Joe Walsh standing on stage going toe-to-toe with country music artist Vince Gill on a song like Funk 49 or Rocky Mountain Way, trading off riffs, you have to wonder, what's going on here? You got Walsh on a Strat and Gill on a Les Paul. And give credit where it's due. Vince Gill's holding his own standing out there, going at it with a rock legend like Walsh. Especially for someone who started out playing bluegrass music, or did he? Joe and Vince Gill are both stars in their respective genres of music. Both are in their respective Hall of Fames. I'll argue the fact now that I think Joe Walsh is a living legend of rock and roll. I might not have said that 10 years ago, but now I do. Vince Gill is 10 years younger than Joe, and I look back on Vince's career and where he's at now, and it makes me stop and think. Is this guy a country music legend in the making? You know, he might not be considered one right now, but give him a few more years, and he just might be. Born on April 12, 1957, in Norman, Oklahoma, Vincent Grant Gill is known for his beautiful voice, great songwriting, and ability to play many musical instruments, especially the guitar. Vince started out early in life playing bluegrass music, but soon opportunity came knocking. It just took him a little while to realize it. How did he get there? Looking back, he said he couldn't remember a time he didn't play a guitar. He had a love for it from as far back as he could remember. His father, mother, big brother, and grandmother all played, so music was always around the house. His first time playing out in front of people was in grade school, and the song he played? House of the Rising Sun. He was to take violin and piano lessons for a short time, but lost interest, and soon started working on the guitar. He played in a few small bands while in high school doing some rock tunes, but he started to take an interest in bluegrass music and was soon to join a band called Bluegrass Review, and then one called Mountain Smoke, and that led to his first record, which was about 1974. And this was to be the first time Vince would hear himself on the radio. It was to be a turning point. Vince said, "So I'm still in high school, and this song kind of a local hit of sorts, you know, and I'm getting paid to be playing these joints," and the die was cast. I knew I didn't want to go to college, so I never even applied. My father was a lawyer, so I didn't know when I told him what was going to happen, but I never got any grief from my folks for living my dream. By this time, Vince was becoming very proficient on the guitar, banjo, fiddle, and mandolin. He had finished high school, and a group from Louisville, Kentucky called the Bluegrass Alliance called and asked him if he'd be interested in joining. They needed a lead singer guitar player. Vince accepted and loaded up his van and left home to start his career in music. A side note about the Bluegrass Alliance: this was a group that some players would later go on to be known as the New Grass Revival. Here's a quick story Vince told about his guitars during this time. He owned a 335 Gibson he had received as a Christmas present at age 10. This one, he said, was his first guitar. He also had a 1971 D41 Martin acoustic. So the first gig he played after he got out to Louisville was at some festival, and there was this guy there who had an old 1942 Martin D28 herringbone. Vince said, "Can I see that?" The guy said, "Can you afford it?" Vince said, "Probably not, but I'd sure like to see it." So the guy pulls it out, and naturally Vince fell in love with the guitar. He asked the guy if he would make a trade, and he told him not for what you got, but Vince said he had some money to add. Long story short, Vince left that day with that old pre-war Martin guitar and an empty bank account. He had traded his Martin and all the money he had saved up while in school, but he had the guitar he wanted. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever seen Vince Gill's guitar collection, but it's huge. Last account I had, it was estimated at $30 million. Some of the guitars have stories behind them. There's a few good videos out there on his collection, and I'll leave a link to one of them in the description box if you want to check it out. And by the way, that 335 Gibson and that 42 Martin D48 herringbone we just talked about, still hangs in his collection today. In 1976, Vince was in a band called Mountain Smoke. They ended up getting a gig opening for the popular country rock group Prairie League. Longtime bass player and frontman of the group, Mike Riley, said, "I asked him after the show, do you want to join a rock and roll band?" He said, "Nah, I'm a bluegrass player." But a few years later, around 1978, Prairie League was auditioning guitarists. Now Vince came along with a friend, just to observe, but this time Mike Riley just asked Vince if he wanted to stick around and jam a bit. Vince did, and after jamming for a few hours, he finally agreed to join the band. He would stay with the group until 1982. The Firin' Up album, released in February of 1980, had Vince singing lead vocals on hit songs such as Let Me Love You Tonight and I'm Almost Ready. Bass player Mike Riley was quoted as saying, "Talent like that is a God-given gift, and it's just unmistakable. We just had a gas having Vince in the band. Whenever Vince is interviewed today, he's always very gracious, mentioning his time with Prairie League as giving him his start. But even after leaving Prairie League, Vince still had a long way to go." He said he left Prairie League because his wife was getting ready to have a baby and he wanted to be home. The group was touring about 250 dates a year at that time. So, his next move was to Nashville. It would take him a few years, but he would soon sign a recording deal with RCA. They released his 1985 debut album, The Things That Matter, and in 1987, its follow-up, The Way Back Home. But it wasn't until he got out of his deal with RCA and switched over to MCA that he became a star. The album, When I Call Your Name, was released in late 1989. Produced by Tony Brown, it contained 4 singles that would all chart. The album itself would reach number 2 and be certified platinum. He has never looked back since then. He's one of the most talented singers, songwriters, and multi-instrumentalists in country music, still today. Even as great as a guitarist as Vince Gill is, his vocals is what put him over the top. He has sang duets with some of the greats of country music. So many, I couldn't name them all here. But a few that sticks out in my mind is Patty Loveless, Dolly Parton, Reba McEntire, and Alison Krauss. I know there's many more, and feel free to leave some of yours in the comments. As a songwriter, Vince has wrote his share of great songs. Here's a few of my favorite Vince Gill penned songs. Vince and fellow songwriter John Barlow Jarvis wrote Vince's first #1 song, and it was titled I Still Believe in You. It was released in 1992. This song was also covered by jazz artist Warren Hill, featuring singer Mitch Malloy in 1993, and Bad Company on their 1996 CD Stories Told and Untold, with Robert Hart on the lead vocals. Another great song written by Vince and legendary producer-songwriter Tim Dubois was When I Call Your Name. This song reached number 2 on the Billboard's Hot Country Singles. Patty Loveless sang the harmony vocals on it, and it's probably my all-time favorite of Vince Gill songs. Go Rest High on That Mountain was written by Vince over the span of a few years. The first verse he wrote after the passing of his good friend and fellow artist Keith Whitley, but it wasn't until his brother passed away 4 years later that he was able to finish the tune. Ricky Skaggs and Patty Loveless sang the harmonies to this Grammy Award-winning song. Speaking of Grammys, Vince has been nominated for 48 of them, winning a total of 22 times. As I said, Vince's career came to light because of his beautiful voice, and it's won him countless awards. But as good of a vocalist as he is, many think his guitar playing is just as good, and some say even better. He's won quite a few awards for some instrumental work. Early in his career, he was used on many session recordings. Vince considers himself an all-around musician, which he is. Who wouldn't want this guy in your band? Speaking of bands, Vince has played in quite a few over his career. Starting out in Bluegrass, and then move up to Prairie League, and after Prairie League, he joined the notorious Cherry Bombs backing Rodney Crowell, and then the Time Jumpers, and finally the Eagles, who he still plays with today. Many people has asked, why the Eagles? Well, Vince Gill has had ties with the Eagles dating back to the 80s, when him and Glenn Frey was working under the same manager. This was while the Eagles were broke up. Vince said there was even talk between him, Glenn Frey, and Joe Walsh about starting a group like the Traveling Wilburys. He said they thought of asking Michael McDonald to come on board, but in reality, it never happened, of course. But how Vince got the gig was his agent got a call from the Eagles agent that Don was interested in Vince taking Glenn Frey's place. Now, Vince had been working on Don's album, Cass County, playing electric guitar, acoustic guitar, and doing some of the harmonies a few years back. So the deal was worked out, and Vince joined. Vince says that Don told me in confidence, he said, "You're the only guy I wanted and would have done this with." Vince says that meant the world to him. Vince was actually a big fan of the Eagles and Joe Walsh growing up. He sang a song on that Common Threads album put out with all the country artists singing remakes of Eagles songs. Vince recorded I Can't Tell You Why. And although none of the Eagles played on this album, Timothy B. Schmidt was the one doing the harmony behind Vince on this song. Vince Gill has always been a big fan of Joe Walsh. He was quoted as saying, "Well, I always knew how great he was. I was playing Rocky Mountain Way in my bedroom when I was 15. I played it in garage bands and at sound checks. I think Joe Walsh could be the most important guitar player in American rock. You got Chuck Berry and a few others. And from England, there's Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton. I think Joe is every bit as important as any of those guys." If you doubt Vince's rock and roll playing, check out some of the videos on YouTube of him and Joe Walsh playing Funk 49 and Rocky Mountain Way. I would leave a link to some of them, but you know how Henley is, and these are taken down quite frequently. But you're best off just to search and see what has been put up lately. Vince has been a member of the Grand Ole Opry since 1991, received stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2012, and in 2014 received an award for excellence in country music. He was inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2005 and into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2007. Vince Gill, a legend in the making? You bet. That's just my opinion. What's yours? Comment section is open, and thanks for watching the video.